Well, it is a Thanksgiving afternoon, and we have finally come to the, or rather, I should say, we're coming to the ending of another year. And of course, that tends to send all of our minds spiraling into the potential futures and the positive opportunities we might have ahead of us. But I want to talk today about role playing, perhaps in a different way than you might have heard before. And I'm going to talk about role playing. I put here alternative histories, but really what I'm speaking of is alternate histories. And I put the difference here specifically because we as human beings are only able to capture time in the retrograde. We aren't able to capture time in advance because we don't know what's going to happen. Mathematics and science suggest that time's arrow travels in both directions and may run even at different tangents at different times. But the reality is that there's only one chronological timeline that we can experience. We can certainly discuss what those other options might be, but there's no mechanism for, let's see what's it saying. Oh, okay, I gotta fix that later. At any rate, this episode today is going to talk about role-playing alternate histories, and I'm going to ask you as a viewer during the time of this live stream to live with me in that alternate history, which I argue is actually more in line with what probably happened. And in doing so, I'd like to make some references to how we might handle role-playing and indeed how we might handle regular life with a view toward understanding that history is not fact and history is never going to be fact. We as individuals constantly have the opportunity and almost the obligation to try to make the best of our situation by looking backwards in a positive light. Now, in saying that, I don't mean to even suggest that we whitewash anything, that we somehow give permission for the horrible things in history that have occurred. But instead, I want to look at our approach towards life in general to be such that we give everybody, I've mentioned it before, that if we give everybody the benefit of the doubt, then we give ourselves the opportunity to be given that same in return, and therefore we won't have our incidental errors held up as proof of our, bad character or whatever. Having said that, and realizing that I'm in an open environment, and right now, at this exact moment, I see no viewers on my screen. Doesn't mean there aren't lurkers or whatever. I don't know. But the reality is that when we talk about history in this time of the year, we're all, that is, all of us in the United States and possibly Canada, fall back to the events that happened in this country's early years as the Western influenced settlers and pilgrims made their way to this continent. Having said that, I realize that there's a gravity to the conversation that will make instant enemies or instant friends, as the case may be, with you, the viewer, because you may have a difference of opinion on these things. And that's why I'm casting it and clarifying that we are actually looking at the role-playing of alternate histories, whichever way we go, because what really effectively physically happened at any given point in time is only really understandable in the terms of being in that time period. In other words, if you weren't there, you can't know. And even as I say that, I know I can feel the personas who are not not immediately grasping this. So that's the reason why, again, we're looking at this from the standpoint of alternate history, because we don't know. With that, therefore, we need to look at the standpoint of how we go about doing, existing in our lives with that knowledge that history is an unknown, and really, of course, the future is as well. We only can understand it in the scope of what we know or what we've experienced ourselves and what we have been taught, what was provided for us in the history books. So when we talk about this period of Thanksgiving, I have to say, first of all, I really hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I'm recording this or starting this live stream in the middle of the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day, United States, 2024. And I'm doing this specifically in such a way that I hope that you've gotten your chance to get your big feast on, got to, well wish all of your family members. In my life right now, with the passage of my father in the last couple of years, and before that my sisters and my dad, I am it. There's not a I have a son on the East Coast, but he's living his life, and although I do talk to him from time to time, I don't have any expectation of any outreach from him to get a hold of me on this particular day. He does have a wife and now an ex-wife and a couple of kids to deal with, and so I'm sure he's busier than a one-armed paper hanger. So I'm not doing this from the sense of reticence about not having my family close, but I'm hoping that you really had a great time with your family and were able to really, at least at some point in the day, reflect on what it is that you should be grateful for, thankful for, and acknowledge that. And in my case, I am thankful to you, the audience, because if my message doesn't get beyond the boundaries of the people that I know, that's a relatively small legacy. And what I'm really trying to do is get people playing games everywhere. And in particular, I also want them to be able to appreciate each other regardless of your cultural or ideological backgrounds. And to do that, the best way is to figure out 1 or 2 or 10 games or 1,000 games that you know how to play that you share with other people. So today we're going to be doing an exercise in alternative history. And before we get to that, make sure you hit the buttons down below because it really helps the channel. I don't want to focus necessarily on that aspect, but I do want you to appreciate that although I'm just a guy on the west coast of the North American continent, that I do have good wishes for every human being on the planet, and am thankful that we all continue to exist, because that is ultimately, for me, it's important that I have players to interact with, because the play is the thing wherein we express who we really are in a way that can't be discovered through conversations. As I talked to my grandfather long ago, one of the things he said was that you can learn something more about somebody by playing a game for 20 minutes than you can by working next to them for 20 years. And I firmly believe that. I do have a lighting issue I've got to deal with. Hang on just a second. We'll continue the subject as we go. So, I think my microphone can pick me out here while I'm adjusting the lights. The very concept of looking at time as a modality, something that we can move through, history books and alternative role-playing mechanisms are really the only ways to do so. So today we are going to endeavor to kind of tell a story of a role-playing game. And if you have never played before, just realize that as I'm conveying this story, I want you to be thinking about what your interactions would be, what role you would take in that scene, and then consider what actions you might take. And that is ultimately the essence of role play. Let's get started. Okay, so this mechanism is going to be the same that I use for role play roulette, and that is, I don't expect you to create a character sheet, although you could. in the Nycos mechanism, you can go to NycosRPG.com and go to the Play Now section, and you can download a fillable sheet if you wanted to play along with a persona. You could build it out and develop all of that, but you don't have to. We're really asking for, in the Ascender change, for you to just consider which role you want to play. And in particular, we're going to be doing this within the alternate history of the world of Earth in the formative days of the arrival here on the northern continent of the Americas. And so consider whether you would want to be one of the local tribesmen or women. I don't mean to be bifurcating, because I don't, that's not an issue. But to decide what role you want to play in the scene. And so we are looking at the period of what is now traditionally known as the first Thanksgiving, the first year or 2 years or 20 years that the Europeans have been on the continent. And I want to talk about, we're going to role play this encounter, this engagement. So choose whether you are literally a local boy, a native, again, boy. Man, our language is full of bifurcations, isn't it? But whether you are an indigenous person, of course, which is historically proven to be a misnomer as well, since even the Native American tribes who actually got here by transiting from another place, and so therefore they're really more appropriately called the First Peoples. I'm not wanting to draw any lines, and that's really kind of the point here. In Roleplay Roulette, you're picking an archetypical role, not necessarily a specific role to play. And so perhaps you are a wiseman from a tribe, or perhaps you are a medicine woman, or whatever. There's all kinds of possibilities of who you might choose. And that could also be from the western side. Perhaps you are a ship's crewman who came over, who intends to go back and is only merely depositing these, what you might consider to be the hapless fools, but you're still stuck here over the period, and so therefore you're enduring this experience. Or perhaps you are a person of religious persecution who is running from that to a place of liberty and freedom, and you are truly happy to be here. Perhaps you were seasick the entire trip, who knows? But the idea is that you're picking out the role you're playing, even as I'm concocting what this story is going to be. Now, I've given myself a head start by determining that we will be in North America and that we will be dealing with the very issues that first feast, the first combined event represents. And I don't think it happened in any particular time of the year. I think that putting it with the harvest season is kind of important, because we recognize when we're bringing in the bounty from the fields and from the farms and from the orchards, how really important that is, because it is a sign of the changing times, and we are literally getting ready for the end of the year. So the motif can be generally anywhere at any time in year, but for this season's benefit, I'm going to be doing this role-play roulette event. So pick out a persona, pick out an idea if you want to do it, and if you're new to the channel and have never played a role-playing game before, you're literally just going to be considering what actions you would take in the role of that individual had you been there within the frame and parameters of the story. So first of all, as I've stated before, this is an alternate history. I'm not suggesting that this was factual. I'm not suggesting that the things that happened according to history are exactly as written, because, of course, the victors are the ones who write the stories, right? So In this case, it's an alternate history. You've just been here in the state or in the region of this forested area in the temperate zone of North America around the 1600s. I'm not going to pick out or quibble which year or which group we're with. So, and also realize that although I'm telling the story in English, it theoretically could have gone in a bunch of different languages, because the people that came here came from a large swath of area of Europe, as well as being anywhere up and down the North American continent. So with that, we're starting the first morning of this declared ceasefire, perhaps, or peaceful segment of communication, or perhaps it really was the very first of the Thanksgiving festivities. It doesn't matter to me. So, with the morning rising in this temperature band, you're going to be experiencing cold snaps, perhaps even an early frost, and the opportunity to actually enjoy this time has to do with the fact that the crops have predominantly already come in, if there were any, and in the meantime you've made enough relations with the others in the story that you have agreed to this unified gathering. And in this unified gathering, we've all determined to bring some food supplies. Saying that process early in the morning, or is this something that's already been prepared, and so therefore you're just bringing it to sharing your bounty? Maybe it's something that it was a hard fight to go gather. You had to go hunting for a while, or you had to check all of your traps, and there's a whole sub story that would go on from each player. So while I'm doing this in a general path, realize that I'm also asking you personally, if you are in this group and you are on either side of this table, what are you bringing as your donation to the cause? And more importantly, that you're willing to share from what your bounty is, and how much sacrifice, how much effort did you have to put into the creation of this item. And in a traditional role play opportunity, I would then say, okay, let me know and tell me what that is. So in this case, put it in the comments below. What are you bringing? What is it that you would have brought to the table? Now, before we go too far down this road, we do have to acknowledge there will be differences of opinions. Certainly people that are in this environment might not be happy with this arrangement. There might be a reason for them to be adverse, or averse, I should say, to the interconnection between the two groups. So feel free to bring that to this conversation, because this is a role-play environment. So certainly there can be persona that have differing opinions, and we can have a really healthy conversation down below as we chit-chat back and forth about this over time. I have no illusion that I'm going to get a single viewer, simply because I'm a very small channel, and it is Thanksgiving, so the majority of Americans are watching football games or debating politics or whatever. But with that, in this opening salvo, just get an idea of what it is that your role is going to be and how you're going to interact. And if you have a comment that applies to the opening salvo, this will give you a way to put context on when you are making your commentary. So if it is an opening salvo comment, respond in such so that the other viewers can appreciate at what point in the show you're responding to. The opening salvo in traditional sense is my icebreaker. And so, in a way, this is sort of what I'm asking. So, introduce yourself, describe the persona that you are bringing to the table. If you have an idea of what that person might be named, put that, but don't feel that you need to. Certainly, people will show up at a party that nobody else knows, so there's no duty or obligation before the game gets started to identify who you are, but just realize that you could. Now, for the sake of this discussion, we're going to be looking not at the map of North America as you would take it, but instead we're going to be looking at it as if we were looking at the continent of Yarland on the right-hand side of this map. And I'm pointing to the wrong area. I'm always getting these wrong. There. This side of the map. So make sure you put or have an idea of where on that coast you will be. I'm going to be using the city of Burglecut to make it easy. We're slightly inland from the coast and that bay just south of us, mainly for protection. The weather here is temperate zone, but northern quadrant, if you will, northern latitudes. And so therefore Burglecut has fairly severe winters and snows that start as early as now. So you can even have in your idea of where we are, this specific environment, coniferous trees, some deciduous trees who have already begun to change color with the deepening of the winter season towards the eventual solstice. Burglecut is a dozen buildings, maybe 20 buildings all told, and most of them perform corporate purposes. So you have the city's greenery, for example, would be in this downtown area, as well as its post service. And in this realm, most of the post would be local, and therefore it really is a post where you actually put your message on the board and address it to whom you want it to get to, and thereby they have to come to town to gather that post information. It's by no means considered to be private, but then again, it's also not considered to be anybody else's business. So generally, people who would post to such a place are trusting their community to leave well enough alone. And therefore, the message will get to the person intended. Therefore, many of the posts are general in nature and are for everybody to read, and those are posted basically unfolded, pinned to the post, so that you can get a chance to read it, but so will everybody else. And so with this environment, the openness of this community to those tribal individuals who live in the local area and perhaps are migratory in nature will sometimes also utilize this post mechanism. And generally, there's no opposition to individuals of any caste or any class, if you will, to pass through here. Now, when I'm speaking of class, in this case, I'm speaking of economic basis. So, again, in building the persona that you're playing in this role-play roulette situation, choose for yourself. Are you considered to be economically well off? Are you a European who basically spent all of your money to get to this country and are destitute? Are you a member of the local indigenous community and have many connections and much value to the community? Or are you a young and upcoming member of the community trying to yet find your way? You get to pick all of that. That's not something that matters particularly to me as a storyteller. But as we're starting this gathering process, do you arrive early in the morning or do you intend to arrive a little bit later? There's no schedule. It's not like, granted, the post more than likely did say we're gathering on this, whether it be Tuesday or Thursday, I guess, this year, and in most traditional days it's Thursdays. But with this impending feast, are you going to be industrious and be a part of the gathering of the festivities, or are you merely just a person who is enjoying and taking part in it? Now, I don't know how many respondents we'll get. I suppose over the length of time this video will be available on YouTube, we could end up with hundreds of people at this festival, and so therefore we may actually consider whether this is a vignette-based episode where the pieces of the story are separated by time and distance, or whether these all are generally members of the same community. But just consider the conversations that we'll have here to be the same kind of conversations we'd have no matter where you were on the coast. So with the locals who actually live at or near the premises of this festivity, they will more than likely be the earliest to arrive. Perhaps you have a home that is blocks or less than a mile away. Otherwise, maybe you live 25 miles away and have just determined to be a helpful part of the community and want to be involved with the setup and organization. Maybe you're a carpenter and you've built furniture that can be transported in by wagons. Perhaps you have a portable wagon that can be acting as a workshop so that you can continue to add these resources. Let me know in the comments what you kind of envision to be that part of your course, because I think if you're able to grasp what we're talking about here in terms of role play, it's more about you expressing what you would do, and then I as a game master will adjudicate in later points in time. So literally expect this to stay a living channel for quite some time as we get respondents year over year. So in this first year event, I'm wanting to talk basically about those who are here earliest in the morning, and these are going to be the dishes that need to be cooked over a longer period of time. Maybe they are dependent upon freshness, so perhaps gathering the fruits and vegetables on your way in is your contribution. That means that you've got to start to prepare them for being eaten. So yeah, maybe you've got some melons or some legumes, whatever it is you're bringing. We need to talk about how you're going to prepare them. So leave me a comment to that note. Realize that this event will fundamentally operate kind of like stone soup. And if you are not familiar with the concept of stone soup, it's ancestral. But the idea is that when you gather together, you bring what you can to the meal, even if that's very little. So you simply say pick some leaves of herbs, or you've picked a few berries or whatever. These are then contributed, and in the case of the more hearty items like the long cooking potatoes or the various kinds of meats that are going to have to be on the fire for a while, generally are prepared as early as possible, perhaps even starting before dawn in certain cases. Also realize that with no time frame, people will start picking at eating at some point during the early part of the day. So realize that the only things that really became frameworks for such an event would be religious traditions and people's historical beliefs that they bring with them. So tell me a little bit about that. Where did your vessel come from? Where were you headed? What is your intent in this new world, new land that's being discovered? And so as these food items start to be provided, then the participants now get to start to partake and engage with each other. I guess one of the first things to be considered in that context is, are you speaking a common language? Granted, the Europeans were pretty strict on only speaking their own language because they thought that was religiously appropriate. There certainly would have evolved over the first year or so, at least some ability to communicate what is valuable and what is useful. And so there has got to be some form of a pidgin language that's developed. The more strict your perception is about language and community, the less likely you're going to have a large vocabulary. You're going to just generally have a few utilitarian words for one another. And yet, as you find that there are other people of your type in this environment, you will have something to converse about. And I know that even just saying that, I realize, again, if you're not realizing that this is an alternate universe that we're talking about, it's not an alternative universe. It's not that we can change what's happened in the past or that we should even try, but simply to acknowledge that the sources that provide us information on what happened in those days were intentional. They're not altruistic in the negative sense, but were really truly concerned with making sure that the message got in that was intended. And in the meta, when we step away from the tabletop for a second, when we talk about what I'm trying to do with this, is I'm trying to give us back that commonality that we had when we were kids playing together outside, because this story framework depends on us sharing our opinions, even if they differ from one another, and being civil about it. So I do ask that anything you put into the comment section is helpful and fruitful for this conversation and will help us to develop it. So if you have any comments, of course, that occur in this period, you'll put the chart room as some referent in your response so that the other players can also chronologically determine when this conversation would have occurred in reality, since the show was being filmed temporarily, literally first, second, third, fourth, but later on you may be responding in parallel. So you only need to be here to show relative location, and the name of the town is Burglecut. All right, so now when we talk about optimized history, this is where we talk about what it is we're trying to do. In traditional role-play campaigns, you'll have a session 0 that focuses in and hones in specifically on what is expected from the game in the very first episode. And so while we're specifically talking about an alternate history of the first Thanksgiving, this is not expected to be a replacement for the actual history, nor is it to be a castigation of the things that did happen, because we don't know. So therefore, feel free to give the best spin to the position. So from the standpoint of me explaining to you what it is we're trying to accomplish, realize that we're talking about all of the good things that came out of what we now know as the holiday of Thanksgiving, and downplaying or under focusing on the actually disparate bad things that may have happened, because I want the experience of this session, and like I said, I'm going to put it out there on YouTube in its full form, so it may never get watched per se, but we won't know until we get there, right? So in this optimized history phase, this would be my session 0. So we will be therefore marking this in the comments to let you know that this is demarking your session 0 dead. We're in a village, we're calling it Burglecut. We're saying that it's on the eastern coast of a temperate zone we're farther south than the Arctic Circle, but it can be cold. Currently the weather is perfectly clear day. Temperatures are in the roughly 40 degree Fahrenheit range, so I don't know the Celsius, so I'll have to look that up and put a magic screen on here or something for that. Or if you in the comments already know how to do that conversion, please put that in the comment section as well, so other players will be able to tell what that will be. It will also be in the description, because I'll be doing the session 0 as a descriptive block of the YouTube video. Anyway, so knowing that we're in a temperate, colder zone at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, now we need to talk about the terrain. It's coastal, but you're somewhat removed from the coast itself for self-preservation. The temperature change as you get closer to the water, especially during the winter season, can be downright uncomfortable. And so we're going to be focusing on a place and a time where things are optimal. And that goes back to optimize history. I'm looking for the good things that came out of the period of history that is attributed to Thanksgiving. So consider how well off you have been, whether or not the environment has provided you with particularly appropriate amounts of sustenance, or are you on the brink of starvation? Historically, we have both examples given for the environment of the first Thanksgiving. So with that, we're trying to focus on what we want it to be for the group, and we're trying to optimize it. So I'm going to make the sort of command decision that none of us are on the brink of starvation. Perhaps you are more destitute and come into the session with a persona that has perhaps food, what do they call it now? Food security issues. And perhaps you're depending on the beneficence of others. But there will also be people that are playing on the other side where they feel, no, I'm more than affluent enough to be able to support the entire group, and so I'll be bringing plenty to the table. We don't have any natural enemies per se. We have a large enough population now to keep individuals from raiding us, and neither do we have any piratic activities yet in this time frame, because it's just simply too early to know where something is valuable enough to attempt to make off with it. So all right, so now as we look at the role play environment of this Thanksgiving period, weather's been particularly good. The harvest was absolutely wonderful. We've had time to make arrangements and friendships with the local population. Wow. What weird, I got that one stray gray. You think I'm getting old or something. So, when you come to this event, are you bringing any preparations in terms of materials? Are you bringing your handiwork and as far as furniture with pieces with you, therefore requiring you to be using a wagon and perhaps an inward road to have gotten here? Or are you packing it in on your shoulder and perhaps your steed? Are you affluent enough to do these things? And if so, do you also intend to stay at a local hostel? These towns wouldn't have been large enough to have what we would consider to be hotels or anything to stay in. So the general experience would be to come into town and through the post or through communication with individual groups, find where you're going to stay. So in the soapbox portion of this episode, you would put down your comments on how you would determine where you would stay. It would be amazing if we would have conversations within the chat where the players who are the hosts of this, or have determined themselves to be part of the hosts team, would be offering space from their perception of what this community looks like for the others to stay. It would be possible that there are plenty of open areas outside for you to bring your own gear and simply build a temporary encampment for this festivity, because generally the challenge would be a festivity, a feast of this nature wouldn't be improvised, and it wouldn't be spur of the moment, because you simply wouldn't be able to draw enough attention from enough people. So you would have definitely had to address this to the communities in some ways. So perhaps you read it on a post near your community's center, and you've traveled here because of that. Perhaps you've seen it on this very post here in Burglecut, in which case you would just coordinate for where you're going to be putting your encampment. So consider, are you talking about within walking distance, or is this a place where you would have to utilize your steeds to ride into, and in which case then we have to worry about how you're going to be able to keep those animals in this space, whether there is maybe there's a local corral, or you are simply going to tie your steed up to local trees and such. So we have to kind of flesh that out for this to be a really effective Thanksgiving tradition. So just realize that you can start before our session chronologically, which sounds crazy because I haven't even finished recording yet, but you could already have made plans for how your RPG experience with this would be handled. I do recommend using the NycosRPG mechanisms when it comes to the actual creation of a persona if you want to go to that point, simply because it's the fastest and easiest way to do roleplay. But now that we've figured out how we're staying, now we got to start worrying about the layout in terms of how many tables do we plan to set up. We'll be needing to add additional ones as new players come on. These are all things we need to consider. But assuming that's not the case, just assume that you've ridden into town and you've brought with you your bounty, whatever it is you're going to share with the others in terms of food. The next thing we're going to be talking about is the actual formal portion of the event, which would be a presentation. And each persona in the session will have the opportunity to speak. So perhaps you're role-playing that you've brought your entire family, in which case each one of them would get a chance to speak. So in the comment section under Soapbox, put an idea of what your themes are going to be. It doesn't have to be the full presentation, because we're going to be doing that in the next screen. But what would you hope that it would be covered? Are you talking about equal opportunity? Are you talking about the beneficence of your gods? Or God? I'm not going to be disparaging of the multiplicity, because although this country's founding was by people running from a particular type of persecution, it's come to represent, Thanksgiving has come to represent representation of all people, because we are now all American, as the saying goes. So what themes would you be covering? Would you want to talk about the grace of your fathers and the people that gave you opportunity to get here? Are you going to want to talk about the nation from which you come, whether that be a geographic location in the case of the Westerners, or a philosophical position in the case of the ideologues, or even of the particular tribal nation, if that's the way you want to go? What is it you want to convey during the presentations? That way we can have an idea under the soapbox of the ideas that are going to be put forth, and therefore it may actually stimulate our ideas to look at others' concepts. So this is where we come down to where the rubber meets the road, and this is the presentations phase. And whether you look at it from the religious standpoint of, okay, we are doing our worship to God, and therefore we are doing the gratefulness in terms of our thanksgiving to a deity, or whether you're talking about the general, thankfulness that we have for our existence and for the differentiation and diversity that we all represent, what would be your presentation? Now try to keep it to about the same length as a tweet. So I know that they changed that, but roughly 150 words. Try not to go too much over that. If you do, make sure you break it into snippets so a reader can pick out which pieces they want to read, rather than the burden of the entire wall of text. Next would be to present your position. I hate to say it, I'm an American and I speak fundamentally two languages, English and bad English, but to present it in a literary form so that it's understandable. And I hate to say it, but if something is presented as a portion of your presentation, but it is instead incendiary in some fashion, I will limit or restrict or even block if I have to prevent that unsavory element being made public to everybody. But the idea here is, what is it that you would want to have been said at that first Thanksgiving? That is what we are role playing. You've brought yourself to this point. You've come to this location. You've built out this explanation for where you're staying. You've presented your ideas during the earlier sections. So now present your, create your presentation. And like I said, try to keep it to, I think, about 150 words seems fair. But there's not going to be any real solid limit, just a recommendation that you keep it to that size of input. Once we've presented these during the actual event, when we're actually able to do this, say next year, we can then actually have somebody read the presentations that are the most liked. So if you have your friends come and read what you've posted and they like it, then your presentation may be part of our next year's episode. So we'll see. This is very long term, but then again, I've always been kind of a big vision kind of a person. Alrighty, so as we come to the close of this event and everyone's had their parts presented, the next thing is the feast. And this is where I want you to just literally go whole hog on what foods were at your Thanksgiving event. I greatly appreciate you to be as general as you want or as detailed as you want, but again, try to keep the length of it from being a complete wall of text. I do appreciate any and all comments on the page, so this I think might be the most fun, and therefore kind of leaving it to the last. What was happened at your Thanksgiving, your Friendsgiving, your family gathering this time of year? What kind of things you did? And ultimately, because of this being a games channel, what games did you play? And I would like that to be as broad a list as possible. So whatever games you remember playing, whether it be charades or Pictionary or Cards Against Humanity, whatever it was that you played during that time, because I think what I'm going to be able to show is there's a commonality that's bigger than just the knowledge and remembrance of what happened at that first Thanksgiving. Realize that Thanksgiving is a timeless event, and so as we look upon this period of time in our personal lives, realize we can actually create that alternate history. Not that we can create the alternate first Thanksgiving, but the alternate optimum Thanksgiving. So how can we make this the best event ever is by simply showing how many ways we could share our lives and our experience through the games that we play. Man, this has been a great hour or so show. No, 49 minutes, that's not bad. Close to an hour. If I added commercials, then it probably would be. But thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. And if you have any additional comments, I'd love to see them. I might actually do another one of these for each of the major holidays going forward, because I think we can all agree that there are good and bad memories from any point in time, and we can simply choose to optimize for the positive. And those are going to be those experiences that all human beings can appreciate, not just those that vaunt one society or one culture over another. So thanks for being here. If you want to know more information, check out NycosRPG.com for information on the role-play game itself. And also check out my YouTube channel at NycosRPG for all the videos that I've ever done. And there's, I think, 800 there. And that does include some individual episodes where I've actually run roleplay games and are therefore longer in format. And there's also even some shorts that I would intended to be funny, and some hit and some missed. So thank you again. I hope to see you next time at NycosRPG. And our regular broadcasting is on weekdays, so that's Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. Today was a special case, so we won't generally do this again. And then Saturdays and Sundays, we have games online. So if you want to be a part of our online playing games, make sure you join our Patreon program at patreon.com/Nykos. Way too many buttons to push, too many things to say. So if do nothing else, go to my channel, watch a couple of videos, and give me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you and see how we can make this a better channel. Talk to you soon.